What was the biggest coincidence in history? Well, history is probably full of fake news and exaggerations, so take all of these with a grain of salt. With that said, let's hear from the historians of Reddit.
Thanks, Agent Reddit, we'll take it from here. In 1938, a baby fell out of a fourth-floor window, and onto a man sweeping the street named Joseph Figlock. They were both injured, but survived. About 1 year later, the same baby fell out of the same window, and was caught by Joseph Figlock.
I hope Joseph kept it. It was probably safer with him.
Alright, here you go, but next time, I'm keeping him.
If you love something, let it go. If it comes back, it's yours.
I mean, where were this kid's parents? And why didn't they learn their lesson after his first trip out the window?
Accident.
Here comes that Figlock guy. Hack the child at him again.
Hernán Cortés, the Spaniard who conquered the Aztec Empire, arrived in Mexico in 1519, the very year that Aztec prophecy had specified for the return of the god Quetzalcoatl, a bearded, white-skinned deity.
At the time, the Milky Way went below the horizon, across the Aztec Empire. This was thought to be the pathway to the gods. They had prophesied that when this pathway was broken, the gods would desert them. In 1519, the Milky Way had moved away from the horizon. There are more coincidences with the conquistadors, but it was years ago that I read about it. The gods definitely deserted them.
Hitler, Trotsky, Tito, Freud, and Stalin lived in the same town in 1913, at one point.
Wasn't a town. It was a city, Vienna. It was pretty much the place to be, at the time.
Lol, well. That kinda takes some of the sparkle away. That's like learning today that 5 large Western figures, all lived in New York at the same time 1 year.
Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, David Koch, Kevin Bacon, and Naomi Watts all lived in New York in 2013.
Even Naomi Watts?
I'm British, so don't know a lot of US history, but the fact that the Mayflower Pilgrims were dropping like flies from starvation and disease, and it looked like another New World colony doomed to failure, when along the beach strolls the only native on the eastern seaboard, if not the whole North American continent, who not only speaks English, but English with a London accent. Squanto. Captured as a child by Spanish slavers, he was freed by English privateers who raided the Spanish settlement he was enslaved at. He went with them to London, where he worked as a printer, I think. He made enough money to get passage back to the Americas, and back to his tribe. Of all the places on the East Coast the Pilgrims could have landed, they picked a place near to where he was living. He heard from his other tribesmen about the strange dying white folk in hats, and thought, no. Surely not, and had to see this for himself. So as the settlers were on their last legs, he comes along, and acts as a translator, and negotiator between the settlers, and the locals, and saves the colony. Most of you, being Yanks, must take this for granted, and learn it at elementary school, but think about all the coincidences that happened there. In 1974, a taxi in Bermuda struck a man, named Erskine Lawrence Ebbin, who was riding a moped, killing him. Exactly 1 year later, the man's brother, Neville, died while riding the very same moped. On the very same street. After being struck by a taxi. Driven by the same driver. Carrying the same passenger.
I thought hitmen weren't supposed to use the same methods twice?
Need a ride to work. I've got someone to kill.
Not again.
The first man to die during the building of the Hoover Dam was J.G. Tierney, on December 20, 1922. The final man to die during the project was Patrick W. Tierney, his son, in 1935, also on December 20th.
I told them not to go into that damn business.
There were shipwrecks in 1664, 1785, and 1820. That each had one survivor. Each survivor was named Hugh Williams.
Dude, he was a vampire, totally.
Naming my son Hugh Williams so he never has to worry about dying at sea.
But Dad, I don't want to be a sailor.
You are going to be a sailor, and not die.
In the days leading up to the Allied invasion of Normandy, a British newspaper's crossword puzzle solution words correlated with the code names related to the attack. Words like Omaha, Utah, and even Overlord, and Neptune. The coincidence scared British High Command so much that they arrested and interrogated the crossword's creator.
There was an entertaining TV drama made a few years ago about this. According to that, the crossword compiler was an English teacher at a school in the south of England who compiled crosswords and sent them into the newspapers as a hobby. As a fun English exercise for his pupils, he would ask them to find unusual words that he could use in his crosswords. The pupils were all schoolboys, aged around 11 and 12, so naturally, they spent nearly all their spare time hanging around and playing near the many army bases and camps dotted around the area in preparation of the invasion. The show inferred that the boys picked up these words being bandied about by the American and British servicemen they were around, not sure how, as it was all supposedly ultra secret, and when the school teacher asked them for random words, the ones like Omaha, Utah, and Overlord were among the many they suggested. Now, how accurate this is very much in doubt, as it was based on a true story type show, so it's probably 100% bullshit, but it was a good watch, and a fun theory nevertheless. The brother of John Wilkes Booth saved Abraham Lincoln's son Robert's life the year before Lincoln was killed.
That son of a beach. Didn't send me a thank you card, or anything, John.
I'll sort him out, bro.
To contextualize this slightly, Edwin Booth is regarded as one of the greatest American Shakespearean actors, and was incredibly famous at the time. Robert Lincoln, who had fallen between a train car and the platform, and was pulled up by Booth, immediately recognized his rescuer. It would be like if Tom Hanks pulled you out of the way of a car, and then a year later Jim Hanks killed your dad. In 1898, a novella written by Morgan Robertson was published. It was a story about an unsinkable ocean liner, named Titan, which on a night of April, was struck on its starboard side by an iceberg, and was sunk in the North Atlantic, 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. 14 years later, it's 1912, and the unsinkable RMS Titanic departs from Southampton, on its maiden voyage, and is struck by an iceberg on the starboard side, on the night of the 14th of April, and sinks in the North Atlantic, 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. In 1912, he also wrote a story about a war between Japan and the United States. It starts with Japan attacking the US naval base at Pearl Harbor on a Sunday morning, and ends with the US dropping some bombs on Japanese cities.
I suppose you could say the same thing about 9/11. There was a short-lived X-Files spin-off called The Lone Gunman. From Wikipedia, in the pilot episode, which aired March 4, 2001, rogue members of the US government remotely hijack an airliner departing Boston, planning to crash it into the World Trade Center, and let anti-American terrorist groups take credit, to gain support for a new profitable war following the Cold War. The heroes ultimately override the controls, foiling the plot. The episode aired 6 months prior to the September 11th attacks.
Edgar Allan Poe published just one novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, released in 1838. The novel tells of a doomed Antarctic journey, in which 4 shipwrecked crewmen decide to eat cabin boy Richard Parker in order to survive. In 1884, 4 crew members survived the shipwreckage of a vessel named the Minette. The survivors decided to eat their cabin boy in order to live. As fate would have it, that cabin boy's name was Richard Parker.
I think I'm right in saying that Yann Martel named the tiger in his book, The Life of Pi, Richard Parker after this cabin boy.
Probably a clue that the cannibalism story is the true one. Mark Twain being born when the Halley's Comet passed in 1835, and predicting that he would die when it would pass again in 1910. Spoiler alert. He was right. He died on the exact day that the comet passed.
Did he really die? Or was he dropped off and picked back up?
Or did he kill himself, for the meme?
I feel like this is the sort of thing Twain would do. I feel like he'd have been a huge fan of memes if he knew what they were.
John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on the same day. The 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, 4th of July 1826.
And John Adams' last words were,
Thomas Jefferson still survives.
or so, the story goes.
This confirmed that they did not have a psychic connection, as Thomas Jefferson was in fact dead.
That sounds like a convenient lie to throw off the investigation into the psychic connection between the founding fathers.
Twins born in 1940 from Ohio, living 50 miles away from each other, each grew up knowing nothing of the other's existence. They both were named James via adoptions. Both married women named Linda. Both ended up being police officers. Both each had one son. Both named their kid James Allen versus James Allen. Both had a dog named Toy. Both got divorced. Both remarried women named Betty.
Quantum entanglement is real.
Both had a cat named Schrödinger.
There's a lot of stories of estranged twins like this. I remember reading about a pair of twin sisters in China who were separated at birth. One moved to a new town and kept getting mistaken for someone and went to visit her doppelganger, which is how they found out. There was a whole list of coincidences involved, but the one that I remember most was that they both had a scar on the same place from accidents when they were 5.
The guy who shot and killed Adolf Hitler was also named Adolf Hitler.
I use the stones to destroy the stones.
r/unexpected Thanos.
r/expected Thanos, for balance.
Batman and Superman both have a mom named Martha.
Why did you say that name?
When Soviet archaeologists opened the tomb of Tamerlane, one of Genghis Khan's descendants, and a conqueror in his own right, founder of the Timurid Empire, an inscription inside the casket was found, which read, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." 3 days after the tomb was opened, and the body removed, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union via Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion of all time. To add to that, Tamerlane was reburied with full Islamic ritual in November 1942, just before the Soviet victory at the Battle of Stalingrad. Napoleon tried to invade Russia. It was that winter that was the most brutal winter Russia has ever had in history. Hitler tried to invade Russia, but it was that winter that was the most brutal winter Russia ever had since Napoleon tried to invade it. It was even worse. Lesson: don't invade Russia, or if you do, do it in the spring to summer. Not fall to winter. This might have been posted here already, but in World War I, Germans disguised a ship as a British ship, RMS Carmania, to confuse better armed British Navy. The first Germans ran into was in fact the real RMS Carmania, which promptly sank them down the moment they saw them. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and ring the notification bell.